were understanding what are the concepts of orchestrator and what job is, what process automation, how it will be deployed and how you're going to run and all those stuff, right? So now we are going to see some, so we had some kind of processes that we built in UiPath, and then we published it in the orchestrator. So now what we can do is, we have a concept where you are actually, what we were doing is, so far we were taking data from multiple data sources. So we were taking data from Excel, we were taking data from a web page, right? So whatever you are going to do is, you are going to hold it inside your system. So whatever data that you're going to take from the Excel is, you're going to hold it inside your program, and then you're going to process it. For example, if you're taking data from Excel, you will be holding it inside a data table. If you're taking it from a web page, you'll be holding it inside a data table, right? So wherever you're taking the data, you are holding it inside the data table, and you are continuing. So similar to the multiple data sources that is available, we have another data source that is available in the orchestrator, which is called the queues. Okay, so queues are nothing but, it loads the data. So it can intake the data and it can give you the data whenever you require. So just as an Excel sheet can hold the data and you can take the data, or you can read the data from an Excel sheet, you're going to go for queues. Now, what is a necessity of queues? You already have multiple data sources, right? So what is a necessity of queues? Queues are going to be more faster. So when you're handling a process that is already deployed in orchestrator, queues are going to be relatively faster for data handling. So probably for you to add it into the queue and retrieve it from the queue is going to be relatively faster. And not only that, if you're going to work on one single data source, then you can go and fetch from that data source. Consider you have data from an Excel sheet, from an SAP GUI, from a web page. So you can club all the three data sources together, take the data and load it into the queue. Okay. So these are just not the only advantages. Queue has got multiple variations. So accordingly, you can go ahead and add the data. So queue is nothing but simply this is going to be the queue. However, your data structure is. So if you have a data table, or if you have an Excel sheet data in the same format, this will get added to the queue, and then this will get added, then this row will get added, so this row will get added, right? So we are going to add a similar structure will get added, but we are going to add it in the concept called FIFO, first in first out. So whatever data goes first inside your queue, the same data will be coming out first when you're transacting it. Okay, so before, what we were doing, we were using a for each row, or we were using a for each row when we are actually taking data table. So the entire data table was taken, and then from there we were doing it one row by row. Now what we are going to do is, we are going to take it as this entire stuff is going to be called, if you're considering this to be as the first information inside your queue, we are going to call this as a transaction. Okay, so no more I will be calling it as row of data or data, right? I'm going to call it as queue item. Okay, so I'm going to call it as queue item, and this is going to be called as a transaction. So similarly, this will be a transaction. Okay, so in the transaction, if you have multiple information, then we are going to call it as item. Okay, a specific content of a particular transaction. Okay, so always queues are going to be directly linked to a transaction. So we are going to call any particular processing that we are going to do it as a transaction, and for whatever information that we are going to process inside this particular transaction or inside this particular queue item. So this entire stuff is going to be a queue item, and we have got a specific content of a particular queue item. Okay, so here also we do row by row processing. So probably it will be fetching, if you have, this is the queue, so it will be fetching only one data at a time, so which means one row at a time. So you'll be processing that entire transaction, and then you will come and fetch the next data. So which means if you loaded this data first inside the queue, so this will be the last data that will be there inside the queue. Okay, so if you're loading it inside the queue, the first data goes to the bottom of the queue. Okay, and that only gets retrieved first. That is what we call it as a first in first out, right? So you send the data one by one, and what is the order in which the data is sent, the same way the same order it will come out, and it will do the processing. Okay, so this is what we do it in the queue information. So where does the queue occurs? The queue is going to be in the default folder in your queues information. So you can create a queue. How you are going to create a queue? So if you have a data, say suppose you have an Excel sheet data and you want to load it into the queue, or you have a web page data and you want to load it into the queue. So first you need to create a structure for the queue, right? So how will you create the structure? Go to the queues, click on add, and you will be creating a structure. So here the structure is going to be, give a name for the queue. So if this is going to be, this is the name, and you give a short description. Okay, and there is something called a unique reference key. Okay, the unique reference key is nothing but if you have a data. So in your Acme website you have data, right? So vendor data is going to have a unique ID called the tax ID. So you will be having a unique ID called the employee ID, right? So those kind of information, when you have a unique reference in your data, then you can go and add that particular data and you can say this is your unique reference. Okay, if you do not have, then it is fine. So it should be working. If you have, you can go ahead and give your option as unique reference. And there is something called an auto retry. Auto retry is going to be, like automatically it will retry your when there's a failure or when there is some kind of a data processing issue, it is automatically going to retry. So you can say auto retry is equal to yes, and you can give the maximum number of retries. Okay, so there is a concept of retry mechanism that we always talk about. So how are we going to do this retry mechanism? When you're not using queues, okay, when you have a program where you are writing a full-fledged workflow, right? So you have your data input, then you're doing a data processing, and you're also going to do exception handling, right? So once you do the exception handling, and in terms of any system exception, you're going to do the retry mechanism, right? So in terms of, we were talking about application exception or system exception and business exception, right? So business exception is, you need not retry the data because it is not going to be with our inside our capability. So it is the customer who needs to decide, or the business who needs to decide. So we will not handle business exceptions, or we will not retry business exceptions. But a retry mechanism need to work whenever you are getting any application exceptions or things like that. Okay, so how will a retry mechanism generally work? A retry mechanism is nothing but you will put a retry counter and you will clear out. So when once, say suppose you say the retry mechanism has to work 2 times. Okay, so what we do in our code, we will put a retry counter is equal to 0. Okay, so whenever there's a system exception, we will increment the retry counter and we will take the connector back into the whatever is your first step. Okay, so if login is your first step, so you will kill all the process and then you will go ahead and take your arrow to the first step. So after that, what you're going to do, you will be coming down. Again, there's a system exception. Now the retry counter will be going from 1 to 2. So what happens is, you will be retrying, you will be incrementing the retry counter, and accordingly your, so when it comes the next time with the same stuff, you will be incrementing the retry counter again from 1 to 2, and it will go and check if the retry counter has reached the maximum count. Has it reached 2? So if it is greater than 2, it will not go in. So every time it will be going ahead and you will be trying. So this piece of code you need to write in your workflow. Okay, but when you're taking queues, right, the queue will have a auto retry function. So what happens is, whenever you have something in a error, or whenever you have something in a problematic situation, then that particular information will get auto retried if you have the auto retry option to be enabled. So you need not write your piece of code. Okay, so you can give a maximum retry of how many ever times you want. So the maximum retry, usually we give it as twice. So here also, whenever there's a system exception only, the queues will get retry. The queue item, the transaction will get retried. Okay, so that is the option of having a retry option. So here usually what happens, the rest of the information you need not give. Okay, so here what we do is, we give a queue name, and after giving a queue name, if you have a unique reference, you cannot add the same employee ID again. Okay, so that is the concept of unique reference. So if you have a unique reference, in my case, I'm going to go ahead and set up a unique reference. Okay, and then we are going to put an auto retry to 2, and we are going to add. Okay, so only for the queue failures, the auto retry will happen, not for your entire program. Okay, so only for the data inside the queue, and if the data is failing because of a system exception, then the data will get re-triggered or reprocessed. Okay, the entire program will not start behaving like it will go and retry. Okay, I hope you understand the difference. Fine, so let me go and add. So once I create a particular once I create a particular information, or once I create a particular queue, the queue gets created. So if you want to see what is the data inside the queue, go to edit, view transactions. So in your view transactions, you will be able to see all the number of data that you're adding. Right now we do not have any data, so you will not be able to see. Okay, so fine. So we were processing with the Excel, we were processing with the data, whatever kind of other data sources. How we were processing? Finally we were taking the data and we were processing, right? So the same processing only we will be doing. So you need to first add it into the queue. So if you have a web page data, you will be adding it into the queue, and then we will be retrieving from the queue, but we can retrieve only one data from the queue. So we will be retrieving one transaction from the queue, process the transaction, and then go and retrieve the next transaction. Okay, so this is how we will be doing ideally, right? And then we have something called, these are the concepts of queues, right? Then we have something called assets. Okay, so now what are assets? Assets are nothing but, what is an asset? An important stuff that you have, right? That is your asset. So similarly, asset is going to be all the important stuff that your project has. Okay, we were talking about configuration. You remember we were talking about a config.xls file or a config.xml file. Okay, so these config files are project project supported files, where the project will go and refer some information that keeps changing usually frequently, right? So we put it in the configuration file, and we put it as a project config. So what happens when you have sensitive confidential data? So again, anybody can open an Excel sheet, anybody can open an XML sheet, right? So this is again, we are not able to restrict our confidentiality. This is again causing a security breach, right? So what we have is, we have something called orchestrator assets. Orchestrator assets are developed or are available for helping or for aiding confidentiality inside your particular project. Okay, so what you can do is, you can create an asset and you can give only the name, just as you have the configuration information in your Excel file. What you will do, you will create a configuration Acme website URL, and you will give the value as Acme website name, right? The URL, right? So the same thing what we are going to do is, we are going to create here. Okay, there if you go and create, what will happen? The developer will be able to see this as well as this information. But in your orchestrator asset, if you create and if you give this particular information, then the developer or anybody inside the program will not be able to see the value. Okay, this comes as an encrypted value to the developer. So the developer will not be able to see any of the information. Most importantly, your username password. Okay, most of the financial services, when they are using banking usernames, passwords, we might not need to, you cannot store that information inside your XML file or inside your XLS, inside your config file, right? Then it is going to be security breachable. So what we do is, we create it as an orchestrator asset, and we go ahead and store that information, so that only the orchestrator access person will be able to see the content of the information. The developer will receive only this particular information. So once they use this particular information, automatically the asset name will become, automatically the asset will be fetched from the orchestrator assets page, and the details will be loaded onto your particular program. Okay, whatever you're doing in your configuration file, the same thing you're going to do it with the thought of assets. Okay, so there are different kinds of assets that you can create. The assets that you can create is, you can create a text information asset, where you can simply store only text information. Okay, say suppose banking account numbers, Aadhaar ID, IT something. Okay, all those things you can generically store. Okay, then we have Boolean information. Suppose you have flags inside your program, you have integer information, again something that is relative to your sensitive account numbers and all those things, right? And we have a credential information. Credential information is nothing but you have your username and password. Okay, your username and password is an encrypted information. All the rest you would still see it inside your program. Okay, but your username and password is going to be a completely encrypted one. Your password will never be visible to the developer. Okay, so usually we use assets for having username and password, and in case you want to encrypt and bring it, there are additional encryption algorithms that you can take for any of the other information, and you can take it inside your program where everything will be encrypted and the developer won't be able to see. Okay, so for example, I choose credential, means I can go ahead and simply give my asset name. Say this is going to be Acme login details, right? So I will choose it as credential. Now I need to give my username and password. So the moment I give my username and password, it will get created. Okay, so the information will be coming here. So from here I can choose the information inside my particular program. Okay, so this is what an asset will be doing, right? So now back to our queues and transactions. So now what we are going to do is we are going to take the data from the Acme website, use assets concept and everything, and we are going to go ahead and log into our Acme and then go ahead and continue with our stuff. Then take the content from your web vendors page or from the invoice page, and we are going to load it into the queue. Okay, so this particular stuff we'll see it for now, and then we will go ahead and continue. So what we'll do is, let me create a new process. You can create it as an orchestration process also, it should be okay. Okay, we'll do is the same set of program. Okay, I'm going to go into Acme website. You could take it from any other website also. I'm going to do the same set of processing. Okay, here the Acme URL is going to come from my asset, right? So I'll use those concepts, and you can go ahead and you can get your information. So now what we'll do is we'll start with our generic flowchart. Okay, so in your flowchart, the first operation that I'm going to do is, so probably here you have to include your exception handling, you have to include your configuration file reading, you have to include your invoke workflow. So you'll have an Acme login file. From there, you will be getting your information. There will be a XAML file that will be created for everything you'll be creating. Okay, so since it is just, I'm just doing it as such, but otherwise generically we will be having it as a detailed program. Okay, so that way we will create, I mean, we will have more practice in our real time stuff, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is a get asset. So which means I need to actually go ahead and start with my asset, or what we'll do is we'll start with our exception handling itself. So let me put a try catch. We'll go ahead and we'll do the actual programming. So inside my try catch only I'm going to write. So this is going to be, so here we are going to start with our actual programming. So I'm going to go ahead and invoke my workflow. So I'm going to create a new flowchart for Acme login. Right. So here again, I will have a try catch, so that in terms of any errors, you will be able to catch that particular thing. So if you have a try catch, the only problem with the try catch is you won't be able to connect it back. So here also you cannot put a flow chart. Okay, a flow chart works. So fine. I thought the flow chart doesn't work here. Fine. So we'll put a flow chart so that we will be able to connect it back. Right. So we are into a try catch of, so this is try catch of Acme login. Right. So yeah. So here what we'll do is the first step, right, for your Acme login. So the first step is you need to get the URL from your thing. So in order to find the assets, so what you will do is there are different information. So you have a get asset, get credential, set asset, and a set credential. Getting information from the orchestrator is going to be using get asset. So other than the credentials, which is text information, integer information, and Boolean information, you can use get text. If you are using a credential information that you need to retrieve from the from the orchestrator, then you're going to have get credential. Why? Because this will return only one variable. So if you see, this will be returning only one value, because only one text value will be there, or only one. Say suppose I'm going to get the asset name called URL, it will be returning me only the URL. But here get credential needs to return username and password. So that is why you have a separate get credential. Okay. So accordingly you will be taking, and get credential will be actually creating you a password which is going to be of the type secure string. Okay. So here, so let me first get the asset. So what is the asset name? So in my thing, the asset name is actually Acme website URL. So you copy this particular information and you give your asset name, right? So after giving your asset name, you are getting some information. So you have to store it inside a variable. So Control K, I'm going to go and say str underscore URL. So your URL is getting created. Right? So after that, you will be getting your password. So in case you have your password, again you will be giving your asset name and you will be storing it inside a field called str username and password. So here if you go ahead and create a information called password, it will go and create it as secure string. Why it is not creating a secure string? Oh sorry, not here. That is a username field. So this is your, let me delete this. Control K, password. Right? Sorry. So you are going to get it as secure string. So what is the difference between a string and a secure string? A string is the content you can see. The secure string, the content is encrypted, you won't be able to see. So when you're going to use this particular information, so generally when we use this particular information, how we were using type into, right? So when you're using the actual information, you can use type into. But when you're using a secure string information, you're going to use type secure text, so that the password will still be encrypted. Okay, that is the only difference. So right now we are not having credentials. So let me remove off all the thing. So I've got the asset information. I have got the information. Now I can go ahead and start with my open browser, right? So I'll go ahead and do the open browser. So what I need to open str URL. So str URL, then we are going to go ahead and give the type into username. So this is going to be my username. I'm going to give a delay to enter the password. Then we are going to click on login. This is the same thing that we have done before, right? So I'm just going ahead and I'm continuing. Now that we are logged in, we are actually into this particular page. Search for vendor. Again, after search for vendor, we are going to go to display all vendors. So here I'm going to fetch the data. So how am I going to fetch? I'm going to fetch it using the same data scraping. So I need to do the same data scraping. So let me bring it outside the open browser. So I'm going to do the data scraping and I will go and fetch this particular data. Right. So this is going to be loaded into a data table, and from there I'm going to load it into the queue. So this is the same thing that we will be following. How you load it into separate information, the same way we are going to load it into, right? So here is the extract data table. You put this extract data table to be available until where? Until Acme login, right? Okay, Acme login, fine. So we have the data scraping. From here only we are going to load the data one by one into the queue. So how are we going to load the data? So it is inside the data table. So we can load only one data at a time. So we are going to use a for each data table, right? So from there only we are going to go ahead and use the information. So for each row inside the data table, so you give your data table name extract. From here for each information is going to be loaded. So how are we going to load it? We are going to load it as using queue concepts. So you have a different queue information that you have. If you are going to load it one by one, then you can go and load it using add queue item. Okay. So individual queue item, which means individual row or a transaction will get added, right? Then you have something called a bulk add queue items. A bulk add queue items is nothing but it is going to add the entire data table at one stretch. Okay. So if you have a very less number of data. Say our case only 10 data is there. So instead of adding it one by one, you can add the same data table at one shot. Okay. So add queue item will add the data one by one, and the bulk add queue item. If you're adding bulk add queue item, then you need not have a for each row. Okay. If you're adding only one by one, you need to have a for each row. If you're adding a bulk add queue items, what will happen is you just need to give your queue data table name. You have to give your queue name, and there is something called commit type all or nothing, which means all the information is right means it will go ahead and add the data. If even if one information is wrong, it will remove all the data. Okay, it is not able to add means you will be, or process all independently. So you can process every information independently and you can add the data as bulk. Okay, now this will return a data table. Now what will this return? It will return a data table which will show whether the first information loaded successfully, second information loaded successfully, third information no error, fourth information error, fifth information no error. So the entire 10 rows will be loaded, the status of the 10 rows will be loaded into a data table. So that is the only difference in a bulk add queue item. So you want to add the entire content using the total information, okay, the total data table all at once. In our case, we'll use it one by one. So we are going to take each row and we are going to add it into the queue. Okay, so how do we add it? So here again you have to go and give the queue name. So we'll go ahead and give the queue name. The queue name was j underscore vendor queue, right? So it is case sensitive. Copy the queue name. If you're retrieving this from the configuration file, then you can retrieve it as a configuration. You will put it inside the dictionary and you will be retrieving it, right? This is the queue name. Now we gave the unique reference key. We gave unique reference is equal to yes, right? So what was the unique reference there? The unique reference is going to be the tax ID. So you give the row of tax ID as your unique reference, okay? Because you're adding this only. So this will be row of sorry, dot toString. So this is your unique reference. And in case you need to give your orchestrator folder path, you can give the orchestrator folder path. Currently we have it as default, right? You can give that. So this is the information that you're going to put. But again, you're going to load the information. So which means say this is your content. This is your data table content, right? This is your data table content. So we have it as extract data table, right? Now when you're loading it, what is going to happen? Now this information will get loaded first, right? So your queue will be having this particular information to be loaded first. Now here you have to say whether you have to have the same heading or you want to put a different heading. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to put a suffix of q so that you will be able to differentiate. Okay, since we are using the same program, I am just putting this to make sure that I go ahead and differentiate what is the difference between the headings of each of my information. Okay, so here also it will be underscore q. Here also it is going to be underscore q, right? So where do I go and mention this? We are going to mention this at the item information. So in my UiPath Studio, I will be having, when I'm going to do an add queue item, I will be having something called an item information. So it is a collection object. So go click on it. You will be saying what is the name of the information of your titles. Okay. So here I'm going to go ahead and say the first information that I'm going to add is the first column, right? You could add all the information or you could just add 3 information. You could just add 2 information. All that is your choice. Okay. You need not have all the information loaded. You can just have 2 or 3 columns added. Okay. So that is also is going to be fine. So I'm going to simply go and say this is going to be vendor Q. Okay. It's going to be only in the direction of in whatever is your type of data. So you can have it as string data or a number data or whatever. What is a value? It is going to be coming from the data table. So it is going to be a row of vendor. Okay, I'm equating the titles. So this particular content will get loaded with the vendor data. So similarly, the next content will be my tax ID, right? So this is going to be row of tax ID. So similarly, the next thing was address. So here address underscore Q. Here also I'm putting it as row of address. So here it is going to be again city underscore Q. So if you don't want everything, you can just simply ignore it. You can leave the column names. It will not insert the data. Here also we are going to create. So if I don't want country, I can simply leave off the country. So it will not create it will not load the country information. Right? So the moment I go ahead and add all the information, I'm creating corresponding column names in my queue. So this will be the vendor queue where the vendor's information will be added. The tax ID queue column, the tax information will be added. So similarly, the other information. Now that's it. Once your queue item, so this will get looped. So for all the 10 rows, the add queue item will happen individually. So once it adds individually, you're going to see all the information adding individually and the queue will be loaded. Okay, so that is it. So here what I did was I just copied this particular information. So what I'll do is I'll just remove the try catch. Okay, here. So I will be adding the exception as system exception and I'm going to put it as here we are going to invoke the workflow, right? So invoke, so save all, right? You're going to invoke workflow. Here also we'll have. So let me remove the try catch because it is having a lot of issues. Okay, so here we will have the invoke workflow. This is going to be the workflow name called Acme login. There are no elements and that's it. So once this is done, automatically the add queue item will be done. So here this was only Acme login. We went ahead and we did all the login and the flowchart and everything, right? So this for each basically should be outside. So let me put it in my main thing. Okay, adding to the queue, I'm bringing it outside, which means I need to get the data table outside. So I'm going to create this as a argument, and this will go in the outer direction. So I'm passing the data table from the login. Here I need to receive. So here I will be receiving the information as dt underscore vendor data. So here in my for each, I'm going to put it as dt underscore vendor data. This is going to be of type data table. Right? So what I did was I just invoked the workflow. I called in the Acme login. I did not do anything big. All the settings and retry and all those things I did not do because we already know, right? So I did the get asset, open browser, and then a data scraping. After data scraping was done, I passed that information outside, and so what we can do is I'll put a right line so that the exception gets caught. There won't be any exception in case. Okay. So generically we are just going to go ahead. So here I'll go and log out. So it will start with the programming. Okay. So here let me go and execute. Null reference exception. What is the exception? Item collection, everything we have added. Where is the error coming? Data scraping is not happening. Okay, why to cause unnecessary confusion? I'll put it everything outside. I'm putting it everything outside because we are anyway not following the right method. So why this is throwing error? Okay, str URL. So we have the get asset, the open browser, right? And then I have the data scraping wizard. and then we have the for each, right? So this is going to be extract data table. Variables. So this we don't require. Right. So let's see if this content is writing. I brought everything to the same main file itself. So now it is working. I think between the arguments that was passing, I think that was not working. Okay, since we already know, I was not looking into that particular issue. So here, if you see, go back to your queues, all your queue items will be loaded. So this was your information. So if you see, view transactions, all your queue will be loaded. So you will have 10 rows that was loaded. And since we gave a unique reference of the tax ID, the tax ID is loaded uniquely. So you have 10 information. So if you see in the Excel, the first information, the data table, the first information was FR322. So that only was loaded first. So that will be at the bottom of the queue. So when you're fetching it, this only will be coming first, and then this, and then this, and then this, right? So whatever we did was I just created an get asset. I got the asset from the orchestrator of the URL. I use that in our open browser, and in our open browser, I use the same URL that I got it from the asset. Then give your username, your password, all your navigation. And once your navigation is done, go and click on your data scraping. And in your data scraping, sorry, in your data scraping, you're going to have the data table available. So from the data table only, you're going to add each row by row into the queue. So always when you're going to add it into the queue, you're not going to take care of any of the items. You just put a for each row and you can add it one by one. If you don't want to add it one by one, remove this for each row and put a bulk add queue item. That also will work. So when you put add queue item, here you need to go and give the queue name. If you have a unique reference, go give it. If you don't have, just leave it off. There is the collection. Here you have to equate it. So what will be the information inside the title of the information inside the queue, and what will be the equivalent title that is in the data table. So that correspondingly it will map to itself and it will be loading the data. So this particular information can be viewed here. So go ahead. Here you cannot just go and view the data as such. So here inside the row, I'm going to go and click on the information and I'm going to go and say view details. So here you will not have row information, you will have only the content. Okay, so the last data that was loaded was RO125678. So this is the last data that was loaded, that appears first. So the RO125678. So if you see, all the headings are going to be whatever the headings that we give. So this is nothing but the specific data. So it is not going to be in a row wise. It is going to be a group of data for this particular transaction. So this only we call it as a queue item. So once it is loaded inside the queue, we are going to call it as a queue item. Okay, so this entire information will be queue item. From this, or a transaction item, more than a queue item, I'll put it as a transaction item. Okay, so a transaction item or a queue item, so that from this you will be fetching it one by one, and you're going to go ahead and take your information, right? So what happens is, now this entire information is one information. So similarly, if you go ahead and see, the next information will be the entire information of the next tax ID. Right? So now we have loaded into the queue. So how are we going to fetch the items from the queue? You can add it into the same program, or you can create it as a different exercise. That is to you. So usually what will happen is, here we have added, right? So once you have added, if there's a unique reference, you won't be able to add the same content again. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to comment this. Otherwise, it will be throwing the error called unique reference key, unique reference key. Okay. So you won't be able to add the same content again, right? So only for that reason, I am commenting on that particular stuff, right? From here, we are going to start the information regarding your fetching from the queue. Okay. So here I will say I'm going to fetch it from the queue. So we are going to do the queue transaction processing. Okay. No more it will be called as data. We are going to call it as a transaction item, which will be of the variable type queue item. Okay. So whenever you are bringing the data from the queues, you are going to call it as a queue item variable type. No more it will be called a data table, or no more it will be called any other variable types. So a queue item variable, whenever you're going to whenever you're going to bring the data from the queue, it is going to be called as a queue item variable. Okay. Now, how are we going to go ahead and get the individual data one by one? From here, we are going to start with the queue transaction. So how are we going to do? First, we are going to go ahead and identify what is a queue name, and we are going to get one transaction at a time. So go and get transaction. So in your queues, if you see, there is a get transaction item. Okay. So in your get transaction item, what are we going to do? We are going to go ahead and give the queue name. So once you give the queue name and you create an output, so automatically the first information will be loaded. Okay. So here I will go and give the queue name. So what was the queue name? The queue name was J underscore vendor queue. Right. So we will give the queue name. And now the queue, once you're doing a get transaction, which means an individual content is going to come. So which means this content is going to come. The first content that we loaded. So this entire content is going to come, or this entire content is going to come, right? So this entire content is going to be called as a queue item. So when you're going to hold it, you're going to hold it inside a variable. So always we call that information as a transaction item. Okay. And we are going to put it as, so if you say transaction item means it's a transaction that is obtained from the queue. So you have to remember this word always. A transaction item is nothing but information that you are going to retrieve from the queue, which is going to be of variable type queue item. Okay. A transaction item is nothing but a transaction that you're going to retrieve from the queue that is going to be of type queue item, right? So what is going to be the transaction? I will go and say Control K. I'm going to put it as out underscore queue info. Okay. Now if you see, a queue item variable is getting created. So which means individual transaction item will be fetched from the thing. So which means this is FR 322345. This entire content will be fetched. That is a transaction item. The variable type is going to be queue item. So the entire content will be loaded. Okay. Now we are going to go ahead and take the individual items. Now, if you want to process with the tax ID, or if you want to take a particular information from this entire content, then you can split the information and you can process. Okay. So how will you split? So you've got the entire content. Now, if you want only this content alone, so how will you take this particular content? You have to take this particular content using the concept called, here how is it displayed? It's displayed as specific data, right? So here also we are going to use the same concept. So here if I want to create, or if I want to take a particular information, so it has got 5 items inside it, or 5 information inside it. So if I want to take the tax ID information, okay, so I'm going to create tax ID information means again I need to create a variable name to hold it, right? So I'm going to say out underscore queue vendor name. Okay. Now this is going to be, you create it as, what was your transaction item that we created? The out underscore queue info. So it is holding the entire value, right? If it is a data table, you say data table dot. So here it is the transaction item or the queue item. So you're going to say the queue item dot specific content of whatever is your column name. dot toString. So now automatically what will happen from the queue item which had all this information from the out queue, okay, you are going to fetch only this particular information. So the Meditronic Technologies will come and sit on this particular out vendor name. Okay. So similarly, if you want to take another information called the tax ID, you can put it as Control K, out underscore Q tax ID. Here I'll do the same thing. So what is my transaction item? Now my transaction item was out underscore Q info dot specific content of tax ID underscore Q. All these are case sensitive. If you don't give the column names correctly, then we are going to have an issue. It will not return. So this is tax space ID capital D underscore Q. Yeah. Okay. So here we can simply go and put a right line or however you want to do the processing. Out tax ID, concatenate, space, and I'm going to give the out the queue vendor name. Right? So what it is going to do, it will be whatever it needs to do. So all this I'm going to come, let me just comment all this so that we'll directly go to the get item. So for each row also we don't require, right? So directly I'm going to the get. We have already loaded to the queue, right? So why should we load it again and again, right? It will be throwing an error because we have a unique reference. So I'm going to directly get the information from the queue and we are going to use the get transaction item, give your queue name and create an output variable which will be okay. Yeah, so which will be of the variable type queue item. From there you're going to retrieve individual items. So how will you in retrieve? You're going to call it as dot specific content. A very important, whenever you're going to use, people ask this question, how do you retrieve a specific content from your or a relevant single information from the queue? Always you have to mention dot specific content. Okay, so this we are going to retrieve. So what I'm going to do is I have commented all the information that we have loaded into the queue. So all that information I have commented and we are going to directly do with the processing. Okay, so get transaction item individually it will get, right? So now let's go and run this particular information. So it has completed. So what did it do? It did the first item it retrieved, but it did not retrieve the, and it stopped after that. So if you see here also, if I go and refresh, the first item would be in the status in progress. So everything that was loaded in the status new. Once it starts the processing, it went to in progress automatically. Okay. But after that, it completed the process. It did not change it to successful, right? And it did not start with the end of the information. Okay. So the next information it needs to process, right? But it did not do. So which means you need to loop it to do. So we are not having a for each row here. Every time you need to loop it to go ahead and get the next transaction. Okay. So once I complete this particular step, I need to change the status to success. So how am I going to go ahead and change the status? So here you will be checking all the information. So you have multiple information. Set transaction progress. So which means you're going to change the status to a progress, in progress status. So you have different statuses that is available. Okay. You have new, in progress, failed, successful, abandoned, retried, and deleted. I'll explain what are all these statuses. So there are chances if you're retrying, you means you're going to change it back to in progress. So whenever you want to change the status back to in progress, you can go and use set transaction in progress. So that can be used So you can go ahead and give the transaction item, it will automatically go. So if you want to change any other statuses, then go ahead and use set transaction status, for which I need to go and set the transaction status to success. I need to set it for the information that I received. So what was the information I received? Out underscore Q info. So I will go and say set transaction status. What is the transaction type? I'm going to say out underscore Q info, right? So here you will be making the condition check. So you are here, we will be having a try catch. If there's an exception, you will be putting a try catch. If there's an exception, you will be putting it into a set transaction status is equal to, you will put it as failed. And after failed, you have to choose what is the error type, whether it is an application exception or whether it is a business exception. So you can set all the things. So basically you will give the reason. Okay. So here in a try catch block, we have to put it, or outside in a try catch block, you have to put it, right? So after you putting it right now, this particular information, let's simply put it as successful, because we are not doing any big processing, right? So we are making it as successful. Now after this, so it should be changing back to successful, right? So once it changes back to successful, we need to go and get the next information. So which means we are going to connect it back to get transaction item. Right? So now what will happen? It will process the first content. Again, it will process the second content. Again, it will process the third content, and similarly, it will be processing the rest of the content. Right? Now here, this is already in progress. Now what I'll do is, in progress means it won't process it again. You won't be able to edit. I'm just removing the entire queue and I will add it back, so that will come from the first of the program. Okay. So here I'm going to add it using, I'm not going to create a unique reference. Okay. So I'm going to say unique reference is going to be no, and auto retry. So which means I will be adding it. I'm going to enable all this. So Control E. So in your for each, we are going to remove the unique reference. So here also we have commented out Control E. So we are going to go ahead and remove the unique reference, because I have removed the unique reference there. Okay. Now we are going to go and see how it gets added, right? Again, we are going to receive an error. That error, I'll tell you how to correct. Log out. So I'm going to execute. So it has added to the queue. Now if you see, it would be starting to write the information. Okay, so it has information, it has started, it has written. So for all information, it is starting. So all the 10 information would have written, but after that we are getting a null reference exception. So what is this exception? We are going to see. So here what happens is, you have started with the first information, the second, the third, the fourth. So RO125678 was the actually last information. So after doing the last information, you have set the, so here also you would have kept everything to success. So if you see, let me go and view transactions. So now you see everything is changed to successful, because we changed the set transaction status to success. Everything has been changed to successful, and it was executed by robot when it was executed a minute ago. Okay. So here actually comes the picture. So here the problem is, we were trying to do for the first 10 data, we were trying to connect it for back and forth, right? But when it came to the last data, again we connected back to fetch the 11th data. But the 11th data was not at all there. So it threw an exception in the assign statement. Okay. So it said object reference set to an, not set to an instance of an object. It is a null reference exception. You are trying to load 0 data into the variable. Okay, because there is no 11th data. So you're not fetching any 11th data and you're trying to load a 11th data into the variable, which is not correct, right? So what we need to do, we need to always check whether the queue has been, the processing has to start based on whether the queue item is there or not, correct? So if you see, I need to check after getting this, if for the 11th data, this particular queue info will be empty, right? Only if there is data. So until 10 data, this will be having data. So for the 11th data onwards, this will not have a data. So here I need to make a condition. If the data is loaded into the out queue info, which means if the queue has data, then proceed with the operations. If the queue doesn't have data, then it should stop the transaction. So here I'm going to introduce another step, which will be a flow decision. Okay, so here I'm going to simply go and say, if out queue is loaded, out queue info is loaded is not nothing. I'll put it as is nothing. Right? So which means if the out queue info has no data, then it should actually go and stop the transaction. So if the data is not there, so I will say queue end, no more data to process. Okay. So in case there's going to be out queue has some data, right? So out queue is nothing means it is 0 data. If it has the data, then I will go ahead and do the processing. Okay. In this case, what will happen? It will go and successfully process. So it will add the content to the queue. It will check whether the queue item has data or not. Yes, it has got the data. So the first data will get processed. Pick the second data. Yes, the second data is there, processed. 10th data. 10th data also will get processed. So when 11th data comes, it will be loaded to 0. So it will be 0. So it will come to this particular condition and it will say no more data to process. Okay. Now I'll go and re-add the queue. You can add it over this, but for the demo purpose, I'm just removing it and I'm setting it up. Right? So let's go ahead and now your queue is getting loaded. So now there is no error. So perfectly processed, right? So no transaction data, so it ended the transaction. So this is how you need to write your code. So generically you will be getting it as get the asset, load it, and if you have another program to fetch it from the thing, this will come as a different program. So always it will get one individual item. You need to loop through it to get multiple items. So when it reaches the end of the data, you need to check whether the data has reached or not. So here again, we will be deploying it, right? So here this project will go for deployment. Now you will be publishing it there in the orchestrator. Now again, another step you needs to be checked, whether the job was stopped, right? So always before going and getting the next transaction, you need to go and check a should stop. Okay. So if there's somebody who has stopped it, and you create a variable which will say a Boolean variable. So I'll go and say this is going to be flag job stop. Okay. So now again you'll have a flow decision to say yes, somebody has stopped it. No, somebody has not stopped it. So you have a flow decision. Now this flow decision will be for the Boolean that we created. So whether the information was, so if it is true, you need to stop the program. Somebody has stopped it. If it is false, then you need to put the program to continue to the get the transaction, right? So this basically will be, it will be coming to this particular side. So if it is false, then you need to go and get the transaction, which means nobody has stopped the job, right? So this is going to be, you're going to check for flag stop. If it is going to be true, then you will be putting it as a message box, which will say message box or a right line, however you want. Which will say job manually stopped. Okay. So now what this will do, this will be checking. So for the first time it will go get the information. If the queue is true, yes, it will go and do that. All the transaction it will do. And after that it will see, before entering the next transaction, it will go and see whether the job has been stopped by someone or not. If the job has been stopped, then it will go and check whether the job has been stopped. Yes means it will stop with the first transaction. If it is no, it will go and get the second transaction. Because with the stopping, it will go and check for, it will do the processing for the complete transaction, then only it will go and check. For killing, wherever the control will not at all be into the program. If you kill here, it will kill here itself. Okay, this will be the ideal situation how you will be working on. So always all your workflows need to have a should stop, because always we are going to execute it via the orchestrator and via a job. So always all the workflow should have this particular condition, should stop, a flow decision, and what you're going to do if it is a true or a false. Okay, right? So this is what will be queues and transactions. So always whenever you're going to load it into the queue, you can load it one by one. So it can be of any variable type, and from fetching it from the queue, you're going to take it as queue item. Okay, so you get your transactions. Once your transactions are coming out, you will be getting this particular, your transaction will be created as out transaction item. So it will be a transaction item which will be of type queue item. Okay, right? So this is your information. So this is your statuses. So you have a new status when it is going to be loaded. Important certification question, and wherever you have statuses, that will be part of your certification, and that will be part of your interview preparation. Okay, so new, in progress, when it is first time load, when it is starting, when the queue is getting processed, the initial status will be the queue item is getting processed. The initial status will be in progress. Okay. And then failed when there's a business or an application exception. Successful, abandoned if it is in progress for more than 24 hours. Nobody, the queue has never been processed. So it goes to abandoned. Retried means application exception. Application exception, not business exception. Application exception, and it was retried. Okay. Deleted is item was manually deleted. Only then you can go ahead. The item will still remain, but it will only change the status to delete. The entire row will not be removed. Okay, the status will change to delete, so that you won't be able to fetch that item back again. Okay, and this is the failed transaction. So in case there is an application exception, there will be a set transaction status to failed, and you can go and the auto retry option will be taking care of the retry. In case there's a business exception, then it is incomplete or missing data. So the retry option will not get enabled. Wherever you have business exception, no retrying should take place. So that is what will be applicable even to the queue transactions, right? And then we have queue activities. So you have add queue item, we saw. Add transaction item means if you have something in the queue, it's like the add queue item will go to new status, add transaction item will be directly going to in progress, and directly the what the processing will start. The bulk add queue items means it will be going with the bulk add. The entire data table will be added. The delete queue items is going to be if you need to delete a particular state, delete a particular stuff. So here you can go ahead and again give the queue item. So whatever information, a single transaction can be deleted. Okay, it will change the status to delete. And then get queue items again is going to be based on a filtering condition. So if you can filter, get queue items and a get transaction item is going to be different. Get transaction item will be getting only the new ones. Okay, it will change the status to in progress and it will get only the new ones. Here you can filter. Get transaction items, you can filter it by based on whatever filtering conditions you have. The date, the what is it? The status. So here you can, whenever you're going to retry, right? So you will be able to get all the conditions that you have. So if you want to reprocess, you cannot reprocess a successful one. So if you want to filter it and you can get the information. So what will happen? It will be getting all the information only that are in progress state. Okay. So again, instead of this particular stuff, get transaction item, if you put get queue items, in your queue, whichever is only in the in progress item will be filtered and it will be retrieved. Okay, so that will be the information that you will do your filtering of your particular thing. So whenever you want to filter, suppose you have already a queue and in that queue you want to go ahead and filter only the failed data. So suppose if you have 5 failed data, then you can put it as failed and you can do the same processing with the failed data. Instead of get transaction item, you can use get queue items. Okay, postpone transaction item is nothing but you need to specify a particular time and a date. So it will postpone, see the deadline and the postpone. So it will give the information as to say every day your queue is going to run if it is a scheduled job, right? So you can say the deadline is until tomorrow. So until the queue starts, until the process starts executing again. So that will be the deadline, right? So postpone is you can put it as for a delayed period. So you can do the postpone transaction. So do not process until this particular time, but process before this particular date. So that particular information you can give it here. Set transaction progress to this will be to in progress. This will be to status. Wait queue item is nothing but you will be allowed to wait for a particular amount of time. Okay, so it will wait for a particular amount of time and then it will start the processing. Okay, so you can do a lot of things which you will not be able to do with the other data sources. Those kind of information you are allowed to do it in a queue. Okay, so these are the queue information. These are the right. So postpone transaction item, get transaction item, wait queue item, and everything, right? So then we have assets. So assets again. So this is the information I said. Whenever you want to have confidential information inside your project that cannot be stored inside the project or inside a configuration file. So those kind of information which are confidential, you can put it inside your asset. Everything will have an extra level of security. So there is a AES 256 algorithm that will be encrypted, and based on that encryption only, your data will get retrieved by your UiPath Studio. So which means your password, you can never view your password. Okay. So you have a get asset and a get credential, a set asset and a set credential. Suppose you want to create a new credential, or suppose you want to create a new asset from your UiPath Studio onto the Orchestrator page, then you can do a set asset and a set credential. Okay. Automatically from the program, an asset will be created instead of you manually creating. This is a manually created information that you want to fetch. That is what a get asset and a. So there are text, boolean, integer, and a credential information.